when you actually use a helmet, occasionally people get shot. Occasionally there's shrapnel. So helmets need to be replaced. The best example I can give is a windshield of a car. If you have a crack down the middle of a windshield of a car, most people would say you have to get that replaced immediately. We had one instance where someone actually had put duct tape over a hole in their helmet, and we replaced that helmet in Gaza. That's a major, major problem. And I would push Israeli society writ large to say, what is the mechanism in which everyone is checking their helmets? Because unfortunately, there's been a lack of attention to helmet safety as a society. It's a cultural thing that needs to be addressed as well, because there needs to be a culture of accountability and safety that is more serious.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Orthodox Conundrum. This is the Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. Is the Israeli army taking care of its soldiers? That's a question with potentially a painful answer. The genesis of today's episode was a simple request from my son Yaakov this past Friday. He'd completed his training for Shiryon, the IDF's tank corps, a week earlier, and was going up north for active service yesterday on Sunday. He had heard that Daniel Mail, who's a family friend, was providing helmets for soldiers, and he asked me to check with Daniel to see if he could get one, as the helmet that he anticipated getting from the army was not good. When I wrote to Daniel, he immediately got to work and also insisted that Yaakov also get a different vest. He then called me to tell me that the army's behavior in these matters has been nothing less than reprehensible. In fact, he claimed, the Israeli army knows that its protective equipment is often out of date and faulty, but for whatever reason continues to provide that faulty equipment to its soldiers. I had heard about bad equipment, and I had heard about budgetary shortfalls that make donations necessary. But it was always sort of a side issue that I didn't really think too much about. After talking to Daniel, however, I acknowledged that the situation is more complicated and worse than I had previously realized. I am not a journalist, and I have not independently verified Daniel's claims. If someone insists that he's wrong, I cannot prove otherwise. However, I did enough checking around to know that his arguments are, at the very least, echoed by many other people. The bottom line is that there's enough smoke to worry that the fire is real. My kid is in the army, and he's been issued equipment that is, arguably, of questionable quality. Other parents have confirmed the same thing, and if my son hadn't said something to me on Friday, I never would have given his helmet and vest a second thought. That's the reason I'm talking about this today, so that if you have a child in the army, you make sure that his or her protective gear is up to date and effective, and so that if you don't, you consider donating to organizations that provide this gear, and so that everyone is concerned enough so that we at least investigate whether there's substance to these claims. If there's not, then it's good that we checked, and we can now all breathe a sigh of relief. And if there is, we need to raise our voices and find out why this is happening and how it can be rectified. If Israel's leaders are going to send our children to the front lines against a vicious enemy, they also have the absolute responsibility to provide them with equipment that will protect them effectively. If they do not, it's scandalous, and Jews across the world should demand accountability and answers. Let's hope that Daniel's concerns are overblown, or at least that there is a reasonable explanation for something that's upsetting regardless. But if he's right, we need an accounting, and we need it today. We'll get to that conversation in a moment. First, one of the main topics that I've addressed on this podcast over the past 8 months has been the future of religious Zionism, both in Israel and in the diaspora. There are numerous visions of what religious Zionism should be, and understanding the possibilities should be at the very top of the agenda in both the national religious and modern Orthodox worlds. For that reason, I'm excited to invite you to join me on Sunday, June 16th at 4 p.m. in Manhattan for a live conversation about the future of religious Zionism. RSVP by writing to aliza at jewishcoffeehouse.com for the location, address, and additional details. Remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. My latest article is entitled The Broken Record, where I talk about the repeated rush to judge Israel guilty before the facts of any incident in Gaza are ascertained, and how the media is complicit in this as well. Go to the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, in 2024, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast, and JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to me at scott@jewishcoffeehouse.com and let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Daniel Mail is a former student activist turned small business owner who was drafted into reserve duty procuring equipment after the 7th of October. Since then, he has led the effort for Unit 11741 and worked nonstop to help as many people as possible receive life-saving gear. He resides in New York with his wife and 3 kids. Daniel Mail, thank you very much for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I want to ask you, Daniel, as an opener, you're not Israeli, you're living in New York. How did you first become involved in providing equipment for Israeli soldiers?
I first became involved on October 9th. Sit down in my office. I'm in the clothing business normally, and we have a vendor who is involved in tactical uniforms and made an offer to me that he'd be able to help us get it at some sort of discount and would work with me to make sure that everyone was taken care of, because his phone was inundated with requests over the weekend and coming into the start of the week. He's not Jewish, and therefore the phone didn't stop ringing and everything was going on. Meanwhile, we were still in Shul here in America. From there, people would reach out. There'd be family connections. I have a family member who's currently serving as a Sadir regular service soldier, and we knew that the equipment wasn't up to grade, quote unquote. Didn't necessarily appreciate the extent of it, and there was the idea that things would eventually catch up, and that it was only because there were so many miluim that came and there were so many soldiers called up. And then as it progressed, I made my first trip to Israel the first week of November, first trip after October 7th. And in the course of going around Israel and seeing what was going on, it was very clear that the situation was significantly worse than was even being portrayed in the media or could be communicated via text message. And the more soldiers that we spoke with, the more we realized that there was a insanely massive need. And from there, it kind of just took off. We started to meet the needs as were requested.
Before we go any further, I just want to confirm, is this true that you actually have supplied more helmets than any other, I'm not sure what the term is, vendor or volunteer organization in the world?
To the best of our knowledge, absolutely. To date, we just passed the 13,000 helmets that we've provided. And at one point, based on maybe about 2 months ago, 6 to 8 weeks ago, when there was a lull, quote unquote, in the fighting, and you had only certain brigades in there, the minimum was that a minimum of 60% of the helmets that were being used in Gaza, we had provided.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you on behalf of everybody here for doing that. That's tremendous. I want to ask you what you meant a moment ago when you said that when you visited Israel in November, you found out that the situation was significantly worse than you had been led to believe or than the media had reported. What did you find, and how was it different from what you had anticipated?
So I'll give you one concrete example. In the first week of the war, the IDF set up a hotline in which the Rasapim, the people who are in charge of procuring equipment, could reach out and have their needs taken care of. The way that it was portrayed in the media was that there was an immediate way of dealing with these issues head on, and that anybody who crossed the border into Gaza would immediately have equipment that was safe and to the highest standard. So, of course, what most trips do, you at some point have a barbecue, and you go to soldiers and dance around. As I was on the sidelines of this barbecue, I'm speaking to the Rasap and I'm speaking to other people in the unit. Their helmets are from the 70s, 80s, maybe the 90s if you're fortunate. And the idea of having ceramic plates that they knew were safe was very foreign. Additionally, there were other things that would make life in combat safer and easier. Those things were almost not even on the agenda because it was such a pipe dream. And as I spoke to more and more people, it became abundantly clear that there was a serious problem with the helmet situation, and there was also a serious problem with the ceramic vest situation. And And it was portrayed in some ways as, again, being a reserve problem, and that it was only the reserves. I'll tell you that my immediate family member, he is in Sadir. He's a regular service soldier, and this is being recorded on June 3rd. He still has not been given a safe, proper helmet from the Army. Of course, we helped him procure that, but as of June 3rd, as a 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old, he was not given a safe helmet from this century.
And he's been in Gaza?
Yes.
Okay, let me ask you, what is a safe helmet? Meaning, right now you just said to me, these are old helmets. So old doesn't sound too good, but if it's a good old helmet, what difference does it make?
There's a long explanation. I'll give you the medium one. Essentially, helmets have a shelf life if they're properly stored, which means that if they're in a temperature-controlled environment and they're not even used once, even then they have a shelf life because the composition of the helmet is at risk to degrade over time. So a helmet that's 15 years old would no longer be considered ballistically safe. So immediately, any helmet that's before 15 years old, even if it wasn't used, you could there's a serious question as to whether or not it's ballistically safe. If anyone's seen the storage units that the IDF uses, is not exactly the beacon of temperature-controlled climate. So having helmets that are being stored in the Negev for extended periods of time and not touched for 30 years would clearly be disqualifying immediately. So you also have to look at the United States Army and how they've gone about procuring and researching helmets, especially with the attention that was placed on brain injuries with the NFL. There's tremendous amount of research that's gone into this, billions and billions of dollars, to make sure that there's no secondary effects, concussions, and the like. So the technology for the helmets has also increased tremendously. And the United States and the Marines, they're actually innovating on the new helmet technology every 3 to 4 years. So when you have a helmet from 1978, putting aside the fact that it's already ballistically unsafe because of the storage environment, because of the shelf life, if you had a brand new helmet that was made from 1978 and transported to 2023 or 2024, it couldn't hold a candle to the new helmet and the way in which it surrounds the head and provides protection.
Okay, I understand that. Let me ask you something else, though. To what degree are your observations anecdotal, meaning what you saw is really bad? The question is, though, how widespread is it? The fact that your relative does not have a proper helmet issued by the Army, that's really awful. The question that I'm sure a lot of listeners are asking is, okay, that's bad, but hopefully that's only 2%, 5%, 10%. How do we know that this is actually a widespread problem?
So a few things. One, I have the appreciation notes to prove it. You can see that the actual purchase orders from the Ministry of Defense and from the IDF also would prove this fact. They never bought enough helmets over the last 5-10 years to come close to covering the use that would be required for a war of this kind, because they never anticipated there being a war of this kind. So it mathematically is a non-starter. Then they say, okay, we're going to go procure more and we're going to bring more in. So it's an acknowledgement of the problem, that there is a problem and there is a shortage. Because of course, when you actually use a helmet, occasionally people get shot. Occasionally there's shrapnel. So helmets need to be replaced. The best example I can give is a windshield of a car. If you have a crack down the middle of a windshield of a car, most people would say you have to get that replaced immediately. So we had one instance where someone actually had put duct tape over a hole in their helmet, and we replaced that helmet in Gaza. That's a major, major problem. And I would push Israeli society writ large to say, what is the mechanism in which everyone is checking their helmets? Because unfortunately, there's been a lack of attention to helmet safety as a society. That's why when you go to Gush Etzion, or you're traveling across Israel and you have a security checkpoint, 95% of the time, people aren't even wearing a helmet, partly because they're very uncomfortable, the older ones, and the people there are deemed, quote unquote, less at risk than someone who's actively searching for Hamas in Jenin or in Gaza. But it's a cultural thing that needs to be addressed as well, because there needs to be a culture of accountability and safety that is more serious.
Let me ask about vests as well, because
Yes.
you've also donated vests. What's the general problem with the vest that exists?
So the general problem with the vests are as they wear down over time, they might be mispositioned on your body and they're less able to maintain stability over the regions of your chest that need to be protected. So if you have an older vest that doesn't have the same mechanism of maintaining how tight it is on you, it might actually slouch down. And we have an instance of a soldier who unfortunately lost his life because of a vest that was not properly positioned. We also know of about a half dozen soldiers. They were killed and they didn't have proper side plate protection. It left them exposed for large portions of their body. I'll also add that two more additional points that are very important when it comes to vests. One is if God forbid something happens, how quickly someone can actually remove the vest from your body. And a lot of these newer vests have quick release functions, and the quick release function allows or any of the medics to quickly get the vest off of the person and make sure that they're able to treat them. And the next point is the compatibility with pouches. So if you're in a situation where you need to have different items as a medic or different items for your gun, whatever it might be, the newer vests provide significantly more compatibility. And I would also encourage listeners to look at the pictures of the leaders of the IDF and the leaders of the government. When they enter Gaza or they go to unsafe areas, they are all wearing the new equipment. They are not wearing a shachpat from 1983 with a helmet without rails or an older helmet that we know to be ballistically unsafe. Something that's also funny to me is Israel came out and said there's only 4 helmet brands that are approved for use in the IDF. They're these 4 American companies. Tens of thousands of soldiers were actually using helmets from a company called Orlight or a company called Rabintex. These are both Israeli companies, one of which is definitely not still in business. And they were manufactured decades ago. So the standard that Israel was proclaiming as an absolute necessity wasn't even met by what the soldiers were given by the army.
Daniel, let me ask you about something that you said to me over the phone a couple days ago. It was on Friday when we talked. You said something about you spoke to people in the United States Army and asked them about their opinion about certain helmets. Can you repeat that story to me?
Yes. So originally I called them saying there seems to be a situation and the IDF is insisting that there's only mid-cut helmets that can be used. So it has to come down to here. And do you have special forces mid-cut helmets? I was laughed at. They said, what are you talking about? That's not a thing. I said, IDF is saying that this is what it has to be. And they said, are you sure? That doesn't make any sense. I've never seen that. Now, if you look at photos of special forces, whether that's Sarah McCall, Shetu Shloshes and the like, they all have what's in Israel called the Reish helmet that is compatible with the communication system. So the right hand doesn't necessarily know what the left hand's doing when it came to some of these instructions that were being given. And the other point is, when I said to people in the United States military or police military that we're replacing helmets from the 70s and 80s, they were laughing. They said, that's not true. There's no way that's true. I don't believe you. And
That
when
they're
I showed
actually
them,
using helmets that are 40 years old, you mean?
yes. And I asked someone, what would you say if you were sent to go raid a house for a drug issue in Suffolk or Nassau County on Long Island? And they said, I wouldn't go, let alone Hamas or Hezbollah. And they had no concept of it. They couldn't understand the question. The premise of the question was completely foreign to them.
Okay, that's very scary. But I want to challenge you a little bit. In preparing for our conversation, Daniel, I spoke to a couple people. Here's one, and I'm just going to read to you what this person wrote back to me. Now, this person is not a career Army person. He's not in the Army right now, but he's somebody who served in an elite unit. Okay. And when I said that people are saying, and I'm not only talking about you, there were lots of others who said, yes, the equipment issue is a serious problem. He disagreed. And this is what he wrote to me on WhatsApp. I'm translating from the Hebrew. He said, there is no shortage of good equipment, but when better equipment arrives, and sometimes better means more about comfort than effectiveness, It goes to the most elite units, and the elite units' old equipment is then passed downward. It's important to note that soldiers and tanks often have lower priority in terms of equipment than other units, as the tank itself is their primary protection. In sum, it seems to me that because of donations to soldiers, there's higher expectations of the equipment, but in fact, the equipment is good. I'm just curious if you think he's completely wrong or there's some truth to that.
So this person is completely wrong. It's a morally reprehensible response. And this person, I challenge them to say this publicly with their name on it. Most of the people who say these kinds of things can say it on WhatsApp privately and say, okay, I don't want to get in it. But I would challenge these people to say it publicly. I'll tell you, for example.
He has no dog in this fight. I just asked him a question, and he didn't ask me to leave him anonymous.
I
chose to.
So no, but so my point, right. So my point is, though, is that the culture of quote unquote keeping them stupid is very prevalent in the IDF and is very prevalent in Israel. So I've also found that when you speak to Duv Devan, they say, oh, this must have been our problem, but Agos, I'm sure, is set. Then you go to Agos and they say, this must just be for us, our specific pluga, She'et Shlosesrei, they must be set. Then you go to She'et Shlosesrei, they say, it just must be because of the war. I'm sure, I promise you Shaldag is set. Then you go to Shaldag, v'chulu v'chulu. That's what goes on. So I can tell you for a fact, there are multiple dozens of plugot in high elite units that needed top to bottom to receive donations after October 7th, that fought on October 7th with horrible equipment. And the idea that they would then receive equipment and pass it down is just not true, because they never received the equipment in the first place. The other thing is there was a concerted effort to say that it's a comfort issue. It is not a comfort issue primarily. The only concern is ballistic safety. And when you look at the ballistic safety reports of helmets from the 70s and 80s and 90s, you know that these helmets will fail what's the NIJ, National Institute of Justice, level 0101.06 test, which is the standard of the equipment that to enter into the IDF use now. So the old equipment doesn't meet the standard that the IDF says it needs to meet to be used. So these helmets and these vests, the ceramic, they don't work from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And the suggestion that it's just, okay, you're protected by the tank. I wish that were true, but I can give you an example of people, out of respect for the family and the soldiers, I won't say names, but there's multiple cases of people exiting the Namer or the Nagmash or their tank and being killed, not wearing proper equipment, or being seriously injured, not wearing proper equipment. So it's not as if you sit in your tank and that's it. I think that any person who enters a war zone deserves to have a ballistically sound helmet. I think that's a fair expectation for the IDF.
Very fair. Now, just in fairness, this person didn't ask me to keep him anonymous. I'm choosing to not mention his name. That's
Absolutely.
All, okay. In fact, there's another person I also spoke to today, and he too did not say that I couldn't use his name, but I'm choosing not to. So I want to at least be fair to that sense. Okay. So this person is actually a well-regarded Israeli expert in infantry tactics. He's an American, and I mentioned our conversation from Friday, and his opinion was that on the one hand, you're right. The equipment is not up to scratch. There are problems with it. But he also said it's not quite as black and white as you're asserting. Let me mention some of the things that he said. Okay, he said, and he also was an infantryman, he believes, and he said openly, that he has pushed for better equipment. So he's not coming from the other side. He agrees with you, but he says it's actually more complicated. For example, he mentioned that no military in the world, in his opinion, actually has proper equipment all the time, because you constantly need to upgrade. You constantly are behind in your defense budget. And he said Israel is no different, meaning he's agreeing there should be better equipment, but he doesn't think it's scandalous. I want to know what you think about that. Then I have another comment from him as well afterwards.
So the scandal is the active attempt to prevent donations and financial assistance from being sent to units individually and to people that were trying to urgently secure themselves. That, to me, is a major scandal. I would also add that having some shortages, of course, is going to happen, especially after October 7th, in which you have complete and utter failure on so many regards. The real scandal for me is that it's eerily reminiscent of Bernie Madoff. in that all it would have taken was a phone call. All it would have taken is people going to the bases and speaking to the soldiers and speaking to everyone openly and clearly and saying, what do you have? And I think that the responsibility of the officials and of the leadership is to say, God forbid it's a worst case scenario and you guys all need to go to war. Do you all have sights and scopes for your guns? If you have to fight at night, do you have the ability to fight at night? Do you have the ability to properly protect every head on base? And I'm not saying that the answer could be, hey, we have 10 to 15 people that they're never going to see combat and they don't need that. And that's a fair answer. But the idea that you would keep older helmets in circulation, in use, and not send the Mossad like they did for COVID vaccines around the world is egregious in my opinion, because one shortage, it might seem okay, that's a statistic, you have one shortage, or you say you have 2% of the soldiers, which is, it's unfortunately much higher, but that's 2% of the families that you're sending their kids into a very dangerous area without the proper protection. And the real scandal is, that this stuff doesn't work. I'm not saying everyone in the leadership knows 100%. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's real problems. There's dozens and dozens of mission critical items that need to be dealt with. And I'm not minimizing that. But there are people in the Ministry of Defense and in the IDF who know that the equipment does not work and are dealing with other things. And for me, it's hard to reconcile having knowledge of the equipment being no bueno and still sending people into very, very dangerous situations when you have people and you have Jewish communities around the world that want to help.
So let me ask the other question that he mentioned to me. In terms of vests, when I talked about the lack of having quality vests, he said, again, not so clear, at least as he understands it. And again, this is an infantry expert. He said, the problem with the real strong ceramic vests is that you sacrifice maneuverability. It might be worth it, and he says largely it is worth it usually, but it's not as simple as this is better than that. There are times when it actually can be a net negative. And similarly, he said, he knows a certain case where somebody was saved by a bad vest. What does that mean? He had a vest, and because it wasn't so strong, the bullet penetrated the vest, and he was injured, but he was okay. He said, however, when you have ceramic vests, there are times when if you have the ceramic front and back, which is the way that it is, it can ricochet, it can, to be blunt and to be graphic, the bullet can go through somebody's body and come back in, turning a non-lethal shot into a deadly shot. And he said he knows of a case where that happened. He said to me, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have these better vests, but we shouldn't think that they are a cure-all or they're completely better than other vests. At times, they're actually worse. What's your response to that?
Okay. I love the film American Sniper. If you notice in American Sniper, and Chris Kyle, they're running out, they have a central base that is built. And then from there, the U.S. Special Forces are then moving out to go on specialized missions. That is not typically how Israel has done their work. So if you look in the Second Lebanon War, you'll have people that are up there and they are out there for a week and a half or 2 weeks at a time where you're getting airdrop certain food and things like that and provisions. I completely agree that the maneuverability is of high importance. Survivability, as it would be called in America, is of high importance. Instead of having 95 or 100-liter bags in which soldiers are jamming everything from a Talmud to 2 weeks worth of food, it might be better to say, let's have a 30 to 40-liter bag and have better vests so you can be better protected and think about how to best move logistically. I completely agree, and it's completely real to say that you have survivability and maneuverability. That said, the idea that you'd prefer to have a shachpatz, which has almost no ballistic protection, versus a proper ceramic vest, would be asinine. And I would not send any person into battle with a shachpatz under any circumstances. And the other thing, which is when you look at how things are progressing, if you were to look at the level 4 plates are slightly heavier than level 3++. Again, this is all the National Institute of Justice, but the American Army has done so much research and so much money has gone into ensuring that there are technological advances that the level 4 plates of 2024 are completely different than the level 4 plates of 2010 or 2000. So the idea that they're so heavy that they're a burden to the point that it's preferable to not wear it, is less. So as you look at this, it becomes clear that there are ways to make that happen, and the survivability package and the maneuverability package should be addressed as a complete package, 100%. And I'd also say that because of budgetary constraints and because of the vision under Ramatkal Gantz and others, there has been a decrease in the focus of the ground forces from a budgetary perspective and from where they're positioned. And because of that, you have certain cuts like, okay, who is researching the best way for soldiers to maneuver with plates on? And are we going to sit there for 2 months a year and have different kinds of plates put on different soldiers and test them analytically, similar to how a basketball team or the NFL would have tests for the cleats or for the helmets of the players? And we know that that's not happening. So, for example, one new technology, the NFL teams, National Football League, I assume that this is an English-speaking podcast, so people know the NFL, but they can tell how many times the cleats have exited the locker room on a given player. And they say after the 20th time that this pair of cleats has exited the locker room, the likelihood of an ACL injury goes up 20% or whatever it might be. So there is the ability to gather data, and Israel's really good at gathering data generally. But in this case, there's just this huge black hole in which it's not taken as seriously for perhaps very solid reasons, but it's just a fact that it hasn't been taken as seriously.
All right, let me ask you about October 7th now, and the fact that they did not have enough equipment. As you mentioned, they expected nothing like this because of the massive security failure that anticipated October 7th. Unfortunately, we know now in retrospect, Israel obviously was on the road towards, in its mind at the time, making the army much more technologically based as opposed to human resource based, which means they thought they were going to have a smaller army and could rely more on technology. October 7th dispelled that illusion in a very, very tragic way. So the fact that they didn't have enough equipment might be, I would think, and you can tell me if I'm misunderstanding, understandable given where the army thought that it was going. Once that happened, though, they didn't have enough equipment because they thought they wouldn't need nearly as many soldiers as they've needed over the past 8 months. It might be excusable that there was not enough equipment for this massive army that they never anticipated needing. The problem, then, I would say, is that they haven't gotten equipment since then properly. But on the other hand, budgets don't just materialize out of thin air. You can't make society collapse because you take money away from this and this and this in order to get more helmets. Everything's a priority, especially in wartime. So what is Israel supposed to do that they're not doing now without destroying the country economically?
Well, okay, I want to take one step back, which is to say that replacing helmets that are 30 to 40 years old should be done. And that's the moral obligation of the Misrad B'Biטachon and the moral obligation of the IDF leadership. The fact that it wasn't done, every single Ramatkal who did not do something about this in a proactive and serious way bears responsibility for this. And there are people that have died because they had bad equipment. And each and every Ramatkal who did not do that bears part of the responsibility for not taking that stuff seriously. And when you speak to the companies that manufacture this, they're very basic facts that anyone who takes ballistic safety seriously knows about helmets, vests, and the like. So I just want to make sure that point is very clear. The idea that you'd have an 18-year-old now who is getting something from 1978, which might be actually older than their parents, is completely wild. And that should never have happened, and there's just a complete failure to upgrade things. You literally could have taken a helmet out of the Begin Museum and put it on a soldier, and that is the age. You're talking the Carter administration, Begin. That's where some of these helmets are coming from, and the idea that I am replacing a helmet from that era yesterday is completely crazy. Now, going to what could they be doing, I think that in the aftermath of October 7th, could have approached big philanthropists and communities and said, listen, tax deduction or not, we need your help because we need XYZ, and these are things that are very serious. And we didn't anticipate October 7th happening, obviously, and therefore we didn't anticipate October 14th, and we didn't anticipate October 21st, and we did not, and so on. That didn't happen in the way that it could have. And I think that the misinformation and the, in some ways, understandable idea that they would try to portray strength. I get that, but at least privately behind closed doors, there needs to be a real conversation going on with people that could and have the financial means to help instead of trying to downplay the needs. That was very problematic. And many of the people who want to help, global Jewry and non-Jews around the world that want to help, they were dissuaded by some of the messaging that was coming out. And if they would have just had a little bit more transparency and ability to have a communicate about it, people weren't. It wasn't a money issue. It wasn't even asking Israeli economy to pay for it. People want to pay for it. People want to help. And the misinformation and the idea that they'd say everything's on the way, you just have to be patient. You have Nadav Padan, who's the national chair of Friends of the IDF, Major General Reserve, saying that to ignore the quote unquote noise of the soldiers that are asking. That kind of rhetoric is very dangerous and endangered a lot of lives unnecessarily.
What, in your opinion, and I realize I'm asking for your conjecture here, Daniel, what, in your opinion, is the reason that they're trying to tell people to ignore the noise and don't worry, it's coming and all the other messaging that's coming out? What's in it for them to say everything is fine?
I don't know what's in it for them precisely. Obviously, this is conjecture. One, I think that if someone were to admit that there's a huge issue and that your son or daughter is currently in Gaza right now with unsafe equipment, you are opening yourself up as a leader to criminal liability, perhaps. I think that's a serious thing to consider. And I don't know that it would compound the problem by then saying, okay, so why do we trust you? You just sent our kids into war with unsafe equipment. That's if I were in their shoes, that would definitely be a consideration. The other is ignorance. There is some ignorance, and there is there's a major communication problem going from the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom in the IDF. And sometimes you'll have major generals and you'll have platoon commanders saying certain things that are completely opposite. So things are very siloed. And as a Harvard Business School study, it would be very interesting to see how the communication could improve, because there's been I was on the phone once with someone who's very involved in logistics for the IDF as I was leaving Kibbutz Be'eri, and that was the entry point for soldiers for a long time. And this person assured me on the phone that every soldier who heads into Gaza has a tactical helmet. And I said, I was just at Kibbutz Be'eri and I gave out over 200 helmets. So somehow what you think is happening is not actually happening. And Don Lekofskas, it's just bad communication. So somehow things aren't getting from place to place, and it's disorganized.
You mentioned to me that you think it's not only ignorance but also corruption. And again, I realize this by definition is conjecture. And I don't want to mention any names because it is conjecture, but what is corrupt about remaining silent about this as opposed to merely not wanting to publicly announce this to our enemies by saying publicly, oh, our equipment is out of date. We don't want to give them any ideas. We don't want to give them any benefit whatsoever. So some people might say it's a problem, but the consequences of speaking up are dire.
So I would argue that if you're taking care of your friends, or if your friends are in this position and you don't want to necessarily out them as being incompetent or having not done their job for multiple years or decades, that definitely plays a factor. And especially with the state of Israeli politics and the like, it's complicated to have those kinds of discussions. Think about it like this also. The Ramat Kal, Benny Gantz, he's now the main political opponent to Benjamin Netanyahu. So most of the time when I point out to people that I'm upset with everyone who was a Ramat Kal for the last 20 years, I don't understand, they say, well, the focus is on Bibi. I said, okay, the focus can be on Bibi. And let's also look at the people who this is their portfolio. This is not excusing Bibi. I think that as a prime minister, you also have a responsibility in making sure that the people who you're working with are under you, that are doing their job. But the politicization of everything makes it very difficult to have those conversations. I don't understand who is covering for whom in this situation. And it's just troubling. It's simply troubling, because I understand as a matter of policy, unfortunately, when you send foot soldiers in, foot soldiers are going to die. That is an unfortunate fact of war, because war is hell, as they say. That said, you can do everything you can to minimize that. Any country can do everything they can to minimize that, especially the Jewish country, because we know how important pikuach nefesh is, and we know how important life is to Israel, and to not give every single person the absolute best chance possible to not only survive, but thrive in life after they leave. It doesn't make sense to me. And that's why we work as hard as we do, because we want to give everyone the best chance to leave Gaza, be a successful person, have their limbs, battle PTSD if they have it, and not have these issues. And it's not being done as it could be from a government perspective and from an army perspective, and that's very hard to understand and to comprehend.
Okay, let me ask you a question, and it has two parts. The first part is this. I'm going to ask you if you could change everything right now. I'm not talking about practically. I know this isn't happening practically, but if you could change everything, what would happen right now? In other words, what would happen if the situation were the way you want it to be? How would you describe that?
Okay, if the situation were how I wanted it to be, there'd be several steps, starting with first sending trusted representatives to each and every unit, Miluim and Sadir, across the entire army, saying, I need to have a complete inventory of your equipment. I need to see where you got it from, how you ballistically check this, and what requests are still outstanding. And there's a period that nobody's getting in trouble. We're not getting mad at anyone. We're not looking for heads. We're not looking to run and leak things to a newspaper. We're just having a real tachlis conversation to make sure that we have a solid understanding of everything that's going on. Then from there, you figure out the financial needs and necessities that are outstanding. If there's budget in the Israeli government, that's obviously taken care of. If there's not, you have a small meeting of minds of people that can influence and know people that want to financially assist in Chutz La'aretz, across the whole world, and you say, listen, we need $1 billion or we need $500 million, and this will help us strategically protect Israel. And you have that conversation. I'm not saying on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, but you at least have the conversation with people in a way that's digestible, and you identify the problems and say, listen, nobody wanted to be in this situation. This is the opposite of good, but there's something we can do about it. Unlike the Holocaust, where there was nothing to do in terms of, people are fighting for their lives in concentration camps or being put on trains. We have an opportunity now, when you have people that are in a situation and need our help to fight for the Jewish people. You have an army and you can help them, and people want to help. I can't tell you the number of people that have reached out to me saying, I thought that my friend didn't really have so much means, or they didn't really have a way to help so much, and they gave $50,000, or they gave $30,000, or they gave $25,000. There's been unbelievable stories of chesed that have come out of this. All it takes is having an open conversation. So from there, you would then evaluate the best way of procuring the equipment. And something that is very frustrating, but I understand from a governmental perspective in terms of a RFP or request for proposal, this is not the time for RFP. This is not the time to say we're going to take 3 months to get quotes from 100 different suppliers and see who's going to save us $3. This is a life and death situation in which we need to get the equipment as quickly as possible to the soldiers. So this concept that we're going to sit there and evaluate back and forth has to also be eliminated, because we're trying to eliminate the bureaucracy. And even if you end up spending an extra $5 million because you cut the RFP process, or you spent an extra $10 million, but you saved one life, that's enough. That is enough. So this concept that we have to sit here and have RFPs forever and ever is also a non-starter to me. And I don't want to dive too much into that, but there are cases of this as well, where things just took forever. The bureaucracy comes on, and then you sit there and you say, how come this didn't arrive? Well, we had to make sure we had the best price, and we had this, and you end up actually, when you beat up vendors too intensely, you end up with an inferior product. That's my business philosophy, and I've seen that also take place in this war, unfortunately.
Okay, Daniel, thank you. That's your ideal scenario, which probably is not going to happen. So now my part two of that question is, in practice, what can happen? What can people do? And that really itself has two parts. They're the people who are wealthy. I assume the answer is donate. But what can everybody do? People who are now listening to this podcast and say, this is a real problem. I want to see how I can help. What can be done?
So there's a few things, and it has nothing to do with money first. One, if you know soldiers, if you know families that have soldiers, ask them about the equipment situation, ask them where they got the equipment, if they got upgraded equipment, find out the facts about what's going on, because we can't rely on newspaper reports or what some general is going to say on TV. Simply ask the question, and it will be extremely revealing when you see what the results are. That's also helpful in terms of mapping who has things and who doesn't, and where things were coming from. So that information is very, very important. Our website, unit11741.com, you can reach out to me through there, and I appreciate all information and intelligence from that perspective that is shared. Talking about this issue is so important so that people have knowledge. One of the things that really bothers me is when people, again, it goes back to this helmet is just comfortable, not safe. And it's very important that people realize that it's a safety issue, not a comfort issue. And if we can save one life just because someone spoke to their neighbor and figured it out, take an example. We were talking about a soldier, you and I, and they thought that their vest was perfectly fine. It's not. So thank God we were able to talk and we replaced that vest. But that's just from a conversation. And it's unbelievable how many lives we can impact and save from having basic conversations with one another. And it's something that should be talked about repeatedly until everyone who's in a combat zone or anyone who might go into a combat zone is properly protected.
The flip side of all this, Daniel, and we're coming up on Yom Yerushalayim, which is the day of celebrating the miracles that Hashem did for Am Yisrael in 1967 in the Six-Day War, when Israel defeated the combined armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. A tremendous miraculous victory. Obviously, today we have a very different kind of feeling. This does not feel like a miraculous victory. We hope that things can change. We say, Yeshua Hashem Keherafayin, the salvation of God comes in the blink of an eye. And hearing about failures in the IDF can almost make me roll my eyes and say, do we deserve to have miracles because of these terrible things? But the answer might be that Am Yisrael remains tremendous. As you mentioned before, there's unbelievable stories of chesed. So the flip side of all this, I would guess, and I have not spoken to you about this before, but I'm guessing that the hopeful message is the story of the generosity of the people of Israel that you have seen over the past 8 months. People within the Jewish people and outside of the Jewish people who have opened their hearts, opened their wallets, opened their willingness to do whatever possible, even as we see problems in the institutions on the establishment level. In terms of the people themselves, it seems like things are very, very good. Could you comment on that and talk about what you've seen?
I'll start with colleagues at my office here. 44 colleagues, none of whom are Jewish. And I walked into my office on October 14th, and they had slipped a large portion of money under my door, saying this is to help the people of Israel. So non-Jews came together to help, and it really, really meant a lot, and it still means a lot. There are people that have given millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars to units they don't know, to people they don't know, just to help protect life. And it's been unbelievable to see that. One person, I sent them a note saying, we're in a spot. Do you think that there's any way to help? I had no expectations of a dollar amount. And they said, what's the need right now? I told them, they said, okay, I'm in for $100,000. So it's unbelievable generosity. And a lot of professional fundraisers make a joke to me saying that I do everything opposite of how they're taught. But, thank God things are going well. So they're wondering how it's happening. And I think it's because people really identify with the bravery and the self-sacrifice of the soldiers. And I also want to clarify that whatever frustrations there are politically and militarily from the top, the soldiers, by and large, are absolutely unbelievable. And you're hearing stories of people that are doing everything they can. And even the ones that know the equipment is bad, and they say, I don't care if I have to run into Lebanon in flip-flops. I'll do it. because they want to do anything they can to protect the Jewish people. And that, to me, is really, really unbelievable. And you have a whole segment of people that we've met through this journey of like-minded people who have also given so much of their time and so much of their energy. And it's unbelievable to meet these people, and I feel privileged to be able to work with them, because I never in a million years would have met them otherwise. There's someone I met at a Tseva Adom in Kibbutz Be'eri. We talk multiple times a week. We coordinated a lot of things, and is one of my best friends, and I absolutely adore them. Again, I met them at a Tseva Adom in Kibbutz Be'eri. It's you never know what's going to happen, and that part has been a tremendous blessing.
So, as my final question today, Daniel, as a means of not getting disillusioned, because a lot of what we said today is disappointing and upsetting, would you say that the response of people and the people you've met and the soldiers themselves are a source of pride and uplift, even if sometimes the leadership might be less than we would want?
Absolutely. And I'll also add that when you've given out over 13,000 helmets, in addition to tens of thousands of other items, you meet a lot of people. And at the beginning, it was a struggle to prove that we were legitimate, to prove that this was actually a need. But now we have such a groundswell of evidence, proof, photos, videos, testimony. Someone called me yesterday. They're a mother of a lone soldier. They're sitting at a simcha in Queens, and the person next to them was talking to them about their son being in Gaza. And they said, by the way, if they ever need equipment, I have this guy. You should go. It's Unit 11741. She says, what? I've known him for the whole time. He's one of my friends. So it's nice to know that there's a community that's been built, that people are in it, and the soldiers are hugely important about it and so inspirational. And it's been, that part is really, really uplifting, because seeing these guys and girls go in and out every single day, do everything they can. Someone missed the birth of their child. I was just talking to him, missed the birth of his child because he was in Gaza, goes home for a few weeks, and then is going back for 2 months. It's unbelievable self-sacrifice. And people say, oh, I can't believe that there's people in America that want to help and do this time. And I said, you guys are doing the real stuff. Annoying a couple of people to try to give money and try to figure out some logistics, that is so easy relative to what they're doing. And it's just an honor to be able to help however we can. So it's really, really inspirational to see what they're doing, and makes me very proud to be part of the Jewish people.
Okay, well, Daniel, as you know, my son got a helmet and vest because of your efforts. So I want to thank you. And I talked to you on Friday, and he had it by Friday. So I am very grateful on a personal level, and I appreciate your sharing your viewpoint and sharing the information that you did today. So Daniel Mail, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. Please visit jewishcoffeehouse.com for other episodes of the Orthodox Conundrum, as well as many other great podcasts, including Intimate Judaism, The Maimonides Minute, Chochmat Nashim, The Francisca Show, and Let My People Eat. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. I hope you'll become a Jewish Coffee House patron on Patreon. Just click on the link in the description of this podcast, and you can get bonus episodes, Jewish Coffee House merch, and more. You'll get special episodes on all sorts of topics that are only available to subscribers, and you'll be helping Jewish Coffee House spread our message of a welcoming, intellectually engaged, and honest Orthodoxy. Just join Patreon. It's only a couple of dollars a month, and you can stop anytime, so join today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to me at scott@jewishcoffeehouse.com or go to jewishcoffeehouse.com, click on Productions, and sign up for a free consultation. Make your voice heard, promote your cause, sell your product, and engage an audience now. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.